Veth had seen war on 12 different worlds. He had fought enemies that crawled, enemies that flew, and enemies that moved through shadows like ghosts. He was a warrior of the Karani people, and his species had survived for 10,000 years by knowing one simple truth. When death comes, you run. You fight only when you can win. Anything else is foolish dot. So when his transport ship landed on Cathar 7 and he saw the humans for the first time, he felt nothing but pity. They were so small, so soft. Their skin had no scales, no armor, no protection at all. Their eyes were strange and wet, and they moved with a clumsy kind of energy that made Veth uncomfortable. He had read about humans in the Coalition records. A young species, short lives, fragile bodies. They had only been part of the galactic community for less than 200 years. Veth stepped off his transport and looked around the Coalition outpost. The base was built into the side of a rocky mountain, overlooking a wide valley filled with dead trees and gray dust. Cathar 7 was not a beautiful world, but it was rich in minerals that the Coalition needed. That was why the Vorn Collective wanted it too. The Vorn were coming. Everyone knew it. The question was not if they would attack, but when. A human officer walked toward Veth. He was tall for his species, with black hair cut short and a calm expression on his face. He wore simple armor that looked like it would break under any real pressure. "You must be the Karani liaison," the human said. His voice was steady and quiet. "I am Captain Park Taiho. Welcome to the end of the world." Veth did not know if this was a joke. Humans had a strange sense of humor. "I am Veth," he replied. "I am here to coordinate with your unit until the retreat order comes." Taiho nodded slowly. "The retreat order? Yes, I have heard about that." Something in his voice made Veth pause. "You have received the order, have you not? Command has said we must fall back to the secondary position." "We received it," Taiho said. He looked out at the valley, at the gray dust and the empty sky. "We are not following it." Veth stared at him. For a moment, he thought he had misunderstood. His translator was very good, but perhaps it had made an error. "You are refusing a direct order from Coalition Command. There is a refugee camp 40 kilometers behind us," Taiho said. 3,000 civilians, families, children. The evacuation ships will not arrive for another 6 hours. If we retreat now, the Vorn will reach them before the ships do. Then the civilians will die, Veth said. That is unfortunate. But if we stay, we will also die. The Vorn swarm numbers over 50,000. We have 300 soldiers. This is not a battle. This is suicide. Taiho turned to look at him. His eyes were dark and deep, and Veth saw something in them that he did not understand. It was not fear. It was not madness. It was something else entirely. "Then it is suicide," Taiho said simply. "But those people behind us will live. That is enough." Veth had no response. He stood in silence as Taiho walked away to join his soldiers. The human squad was gathered near the main building of the outpost. There were only 5 of them, including Taiho. Veth watched them from a distance, trying to understand what he was seeing. A female soldier with sharp eyes and quick movements was checking weapons. This was Sergeant Kim Yuna, Taiho's second in command. She moved with the confidence of someone who had killed many times before. A young male, barely more than a boy, sat alone and sharpened a long blade. His name was Corporal Lee Jiho. He looked too young to be a soldier, but his hands were steady and his face showed no emotion. A female with gentle features and soft hands was organizing medical supplies. This was Private Choi Hana, the squad's medic. She hummed a quiet song as she worked, as if she was not preparing for a battle that would likely kill her. And finally, a large male with broad shoulders was loading heavy weapons onto a transport vehicle. Private Beak Diane. He was telling jokes to the other soldiers, making them laugh despite the situation. Veth did not understand any of this. His people prepared for battle with silence and meditation. They focused their minds and accepted the possibility of death with cold logic. But these humans were laughing, eating, sharing stories. They acted as if this was a normal day, not their last. He approached the group slowly. Yuna noticed him first and stopped what she was doing. "The Korani liaison," she said. "I heard about you. They say your people are excellent fighters." "We survive," Veth said. "That is what matters." Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, but there was something sharp behind it. "Have you ever fought beside humans before?" "No." "Then you are about to see something new." Veth did not know what to say to that. He turned to watch Jiho, the young one, who was still sharpening his blade with slow, careful movements. "Are you not afraid?" Veth asked him. Jiho looked up. His eyes were calm and clear. "Fear is a tool," he said. "It tells me what matters." Veth frowned. This made no sense to him. Fear was not a tool. Fear was a warning. Fear told you when to run. But before he could argue, Hana appeared beside him and held out a small package. "Food," she said. "You should eat something before the battle. I am not hungry." She smiled and placed the package beside him anyway. "You might need the energy later. Trust me." Veth looked at the package and felt a strange confusion growing inside him. These humans knew they were going to die. They had to know. The numbers were impossible. 50,000 against 300. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter waiting to happen, and yet they prepared. They laughed. They shared food with strangers that later that night. Veth accessed the Coalition database and searched for information about humans. He read about their history, their wars, their suffering. Humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. They had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and disasters that would have destroyed most species. They were not strong. They were not fast. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. But they did not give up. Ever. He found a quote from a human general who had lived hundreds of years ago. The words stayed in his mind long after he closed the file. Humans do not win because they are not afraid. They win because they fight anyway. Veth sat alone in the darkness and thought about those words. Outside, he could hear the humans still talking, still preparing. Doyen was telling another joke. Yuna was laughing. Taiho was giving orders in his calm, quiet voice. Tomorrow, Devorn would come. Tomorrow, these 5 humans would stand against an army of monsters. Tomorrow, they would probably die dot, and they knew it. They all knew it, but they were not running. Veth looked down at his weapon and wondered, for the first time in his long career, if he truly understood what courage meant. He had always thought courage was the absence of fear. But these humans were afraid. He could see it in the small movements they made, the way they checked their weapons one extra time, the way they looked at each other with unspoken words. They were afraid. But they were staying anyway, and that, Veth realized, was something his people had never taught him. That was something entirely new. Outside, the first Vorn scouts appeared on the distant horizon. Small shapes moving in the darkness. The swarm was coming. Doyen loaded his heavy weapon and looked out at the approaching enemy. He smiled. "Let them come," he said. "Let them remember this day." Veth did not understand, but he was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to. The sun rose over Kethra 7, but it brought no warmth. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and the wind carried the smell of dust and something else. Something wrong. Something that made Veth's scales itch with warning. The Vorn were close now. He could feel them. Captain Taiho had chosen their defensive position well. An old mining complex sat at the mouth of a narrow valley. The buildings were made of thick stone and metal, built to survive explosions and cave-ins. If they had to make a stand, this was the place to do it. But Veth knew that even the strongest walls would not matter against 50,000 enemies. He watched the humans work through the morning. They moved with a focus and speed that surprised him. They did not waste time. They did not complain. They simply did what needed to be done. Yuna led a team to set up defensive barriers at the main entrance. She carried metal plates that looked too heavy for her small body, but she did not slow down. When one of the Karani soldiers offered to help, she just shook her head and kept working. "Save your strength," she told him. "You will need it later." Jiho climbed to the top of an old tower that overlooked the valley. The tower was damaged and unstable, but he moved through it like he had no fear of falling. He set up a sniper position and began testing sightlines, marking the best places to shoot from. Veth climbed up to join him. The young human did not turn around, but he knew Veth was there. "You should not be up here," Jiho said. "The tower could fall. Then why are you here?" Jiho was quiet for a moment. Then he pointed to the valley below. "From here, I can see everything. When the Vorn come, I will see them first. I can warn the others. I can buy them time, and if the tower falls with you in it." The young human finally turned to look at Veth. His face was calm, almost peaceful. "Then I will fall, but the others will have their warning. That is what matters." Veth stared at him. Among his people, the young were protected. They were the future. You did not send children to die on broken towers. But Jiho was not a child, not really. There was something old in his eyes, something that had seen too much. "How old are you?" Veth asked. 19 years. Veth did the calculation in his head. 19 human years was nothing. His own children were older than that, and he would never let them near a battlefield. But Jiho stood here, alone on a broken tower, ready to die for strangers he had never met. "You are very young," Veth said quietly. Jiho smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Maybe, but old enough to choose what I fight for." Veth left him there and climbed back down. He did not know what to say. He did not know what to feel. In the main building, Doyoung was setting up his heavy weapons. He had 3 large guns and enough ammunition to fight for hours. And you had 3 large guns and enough ammunition to fight for hours. He was also singing. It was a human song, something about mountains and rivers and home. His voice was surprisingly good. "You sing before battle?" Veth asked. Diane looked up and grinned. "Of course. Music is good for the soul. Makes you feel alive." He patted one of his guns with affection. "And these babies make other things feel very not alive. Good balance, I think. You make jokes. You sing. You smile. Do you not understand what is coming?" Doyen's grin faded, just a little. For a moment, Veth saw something behind his eyes. Something dark and heavy. Then the smile returned, brighter than before. "I understand perfectly," Doyen said. "That is why I sing. That is why I joke. Because if I stop, I might start thinking. And thinking is dangerous when death is coming." He turned back to his weapons. "Better to laugh while you can. Better to feel alive while you still are." Veth walked away slowly. He was beginning to understand something about humans. They were not stupid. They were not unaware. They knew exactly what was happening. But they chose to face it differently than his people would. Outside, he found Hana organizing medical supplies in a small room near the back of the complex. She had bandages, medicine, tools for surgery, and dozens of other things Veth did not recognize. She worked quickly but carefully, placing everything where she could reach it easily. "You are the medic," Veth said. "I am." How many do you expect to save? Hannah paused. She looked up at him with gentle eyes that held no anger, no judgment. I do not know. Maybe many, maybe none. But I will try to save everyone I can. That is all any of us can do. But the odds do not matter. She went back to her work. When someone is bleeding and dying in front of you, you do not think about odds. You think about what you can do right now, in this moment, to keep them alive. You focus on the person, not the numbers. She placed a small device on the table. It was a scanner of some kind. I have watched people die. Too many people. It never gets easier. But I have also watched people live when everyone said they should die. I have seen miracles happen because someone refused to give up. She smiled at him. Maybe today we'll have miracles too. We will not know until we try. Veth left her there, surrounded by her supplies and her quiet hope. He found Taiho alone on the roof of the main building, looking out at the valley. The captain stood perfectly still, like a statue. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the first dark shapes of the Vorn army were beginning to appear. They will be here in 3 hours, Taiho said without turning around. Maybe 4. Veth climbed up to stand beside him. Your squad is ready. They are always ready. That is what makes them special. Taiho finally turned to look at him. I know what you think of us. I have seen that look before. Other species think humans are foolish, weak, too emotional, too attached to things that do not matter. I did not say, you did not have to. Taiho looked back at the horizon. We are all those things. We are foolish. We are weak. We feel too much and think too little sometimes. But we are also something else. Something that other species do not understand. What is that? Taiho was quiet for a long moment. The wind blew across the roof, carrying dust and the distant sound of the Vorn army moving closer. We are stubborn, he said finally. When the universe tells us to give up, we say no. When death comes for us, we make it work for every life it takes. When everyone else runs, we stay. He looked at Veth. Not because we are brave. Not because we do not feel fear. We feel fear more than you can imagine. But we have learned to carry it. We have learned to use it. Use it how? Fear tells you what matters. When you are afraid of losing something, it means that thing has value. When you are afraid of dying, it means you still have things to live for. Fear is not our enemy. Fear is our teacher. Taiho smiled, just a little. Today, I am afraid. I am afraid for my soldiers. I am afraid for the people we are protecting. I am afraid that I will make a mistake and get everyone killed. But that fear makes me careful. It makes me think. It makes me fight harder. Below them, Yuna was gathering the soldiers for a final briefing. Veth could see Jiho climbing down from his tower. Doyun was carrying his heavy guns to the front line. Hana was helping a wounded Karani soldier wrap his arm. 6 hours, Taiho said. We hold for 6 hours. Then the evacuation ships arrive and the civilians are safe. That is all. Just 6 hours. That is a very long time against 50,000 enemies. Yes, it is. Taiho started walking toward the ladder. But it is not forever. It is just 6 hours. And humans are very good at doing impossible things for small amounts of time. He climbed down, leaving Veth alone on the roof. Veth looked out at the Vorn army. They were closer now, a dark wave spreading across the valley floor. There were so many of them. Too many. The sight made his heart beat faster with the ancient fear that all Karani carried. But then he looked down at the humans. 5 small figures preparing to fight an army. 5 fragile creatures who had every reason to run, but chose to stay. And for the first time in 47 campaigns, Veth felt something new. Not fear, not confusion. Respect. He climbed down from the roof and picked up his weapon. Whatever happened today, he would not run. He would stand with these strange, stubborn, beautiful humans. He would learn what fear really meant. The Vorn came with the sunset. They poured over the hills like black water, thousands upon thousands of them. Their bodies were twisted and wrong, with too many legs and too many eyes and mouths that never stopped screaming. They moved as one, a single mind controlling 50,000 bodies. And they were hungry. Veth stood at the defensive line beside the humans and watched death approach. His hands were steady on his weapon, but inside, every part of him was screaming to run. This was not a battle. This was extinction. "Hold your fire," Taiho said calmly. "Wait until they reach the markers." Yuna had placed bright stones at different distances across the valley. The first marker was 500 meters away, then 400, then 300. The Vorn were still far, but they were moving fast. Doyan stood beside his heavy guns, his earlier jokes forgotten. His face was hard and cold, like a different person had taken over his body. "Ready when you are, Captain." "Ready," Yuna confirmed from her position. From the tower, Jiho's voice came through the communication system. "I count at least 40,000 in the first wave. More behind them. They are testing us. Testing them." As if this was just a game to the Vorn, Veth felt sick. The swarm reached the first marker. 500 meters. Taiho still did not give the order. The Vorn screamed louder, sensing their prey was close. 400 meters. Veth could see individual creatures now. They had claws like blades and teeth that dripped with poison. Their eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. 300 meters. "Now," Taiho said. The world exploded. Doyan's heavy guns roared to life, spitting fire into the swarm. Veth had never heard anything so loud. The Vorn in front fell by the dozens, their bodies torn apart by the weapons. But more came behind them. Always more. Yuna opened fire with her rifle, every shot finding a target. She did not waste ammunition. She did not miss. Every pull of her trigger meant one less enemy. Veth fired his own weapon, adding to the storm of death. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually hold. The Vorn were falling fast, their bodies piling up at the defensive line. But they did not stop. The swarm crashed against the barriers like a wave against rocks. Creatures climbed over the bodies of their dead and kept coming. Claws scraped against metal. Teeth bit at stone. The screaming was endless. "They are trying to flank us on the left," Jiho called from his tower. A second later, his rifle cracked, and a Vorn that had been climbing the wall fell dead. Taiho moved before Veth could even process the information. "Yuna, take 3 soldiers and cover the left side. Do not let them through. On it." Yuna ran without hesitation, her soldiers following close behind. Veth found himself standing next to Taiho at the main gate. The captain was firing his weapon with mechanical precision, but his eyes were everywhere at once. He saw everything. He controlled everything. He was the calm center of the storm. Avorn broke through the barrier and lunged at Taiho. The captain did not flinch. He simply stepped to the side, pulled out a knife, and cut the creature's throat in one smooth motion. Then he went back to shooting as if nothing had happened. "You are good at this," Veth said, surprised by his own voice. "Practice," Taiho replied. "Lots of practice." An explosion shook the ground. Veth turned to see part of the left wall collapsing. Vorn poured through the gap, screaming with victory. But Yuna was there. She stood in the middle of the broken wall, alone against dozens of enemies, and she did not move. Her rifle was empty, so she pulled out 2 pistols and kept firing. When those were empty, she pulled out a blade. Veth had never seen anyone fight like that. She was like a dancer, moving between the creatures with impossible grace. Every movement was death. Every step was destruction. The Vorn fell around her like rain. Backup arrived just as she killed the last one. Una stood among the bodies, breathing hard, covered in blood that was not her own. She looked at her soldiers and smiled. "Seal the gap," she ordered. "They will try again." Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Veth could not tell anymore. Time had lost all meaning. There was only the fight, the shooting, the screaming, the endless waves of Vorn throwing themselves at the defenders. Jiho's tower was hit by a Vorn that could fly. The creature crashed into the structure, and the old stones began to crumble. Veth saw Jiho fall with the debris, disappearing into a cloud of dust. "Jiho!" Hana's voice cut through the noise. But a moment later, the young soldier emerged from the ruins, bleeding but alive. He had his rifle in one hand and his blade in the other. 3 Vorn that had landed with him lay dead at his feet. "I am fine," he said through the communication system. Finding new position. Fine. He called that fine. Veth shook his head in disbelief and kept firing. The 4th hour came. Then the 5th. The humans were running low on everything. Ammunition, energy, hope. Dwayne's heavy guns had overheated twice. Una had been cut on her arm and her leg but refused to stop fighting. Taiho had taken 3 direct hits to his armor, and Veth could see blood seeping through the cracks, but they held. Somewhere in the chaos, Veth found himself back to back with Hana. The medic was holding a pistol, firing at any Vorn that came close. Her hands were steady even though she should have been in the medical room, treating the wounded. "Why are you here?" Veth demanded. "You are a healer, not a fighter. There is no one left to defend the medical room," Hana said simply. "If I do not fight here, my patients die anyway. So I fight." A Vorn slashed at her with its claws. She ducked, shot it in the face, and went back to covering Veth without missing a beat. "You are full of surprises," Veth said. Hana smiled. Blood splattered across her gentle face. "We all are. That is what makes us human." The 5th hour ended. 1 more hour to go. Just 1 more hour until the evacuation ships arrived, and the civilians were safe. But the Vorn knew time was running out too. They had sent wave after wave, losing thousands of their own. Now they were changing tactics. The swarm pulled back, gathering in the valley like a dark sea. "What are they doing?" Veth asked. Taiho's face went pale. He recognized what was coming. "Everyone get down. Get to cover now. They are going to scream." "Scream?" Before Taiho could answer, Veth felt it. A pressure building in his head. A sound that was not a sound. The Vorn opened their mouths as one, and a wave of pure terror washed over them. Battlefield. The psychic scream. Veth had read about this weapon, but never experienced it. The Vorn Collective could broadcast fear directly into the minds of their enemies. It was not an illusion. It was not a trick. It was real fear, the deepest and most primal fear that any creature could feel. He dropped to his knees. His weapon fell from his hands. His mind was filled with images of death, of pain, of everything he had ever been afraid of. He could not move. He could not think. He could only feel the fear. Around him, every coalition soldier was the same. Karani, Telmari, Veshan. They all collapsed, paralyzed by the terror that filled their minds. The Vorn began to advance again. Slowly this time. They knew their prey was helpless. But then Veth heard something impossible. A human voice, screaming back. He forced his eyes open and saw Taiho standing in the middle of the courtyard. The captain was shaking. His face was twisted with pain. But he was standing, and he was screaming at the Vorn with everything he had. "Get up!" Taiho roared. "Get up and fight! They do not get to decide when we die. We decide. Get up!" One by one, the humans stood. Una first, pulling herself up with her blade as a crutch. Then Diane, grabbing his gun with trembling hands. Then Hannah, then Jiho. They were shaking. They were crying. The fear was still there, still crushing them. But they stood anyway, and then they charged. Veth watched in awe as 5 humans ran toward 50,000 enemies. They screamed with rage and defiance and something else. Something that the Vorn had never encountered before. They screamed with hope. Veth did not understand how, but he found himself standing too. He found his weapon in his hands. He found his legs carrying him forward, following the humans into the horde. The Vorn hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. The humans hit them like a storm. The psychic scream still echoed in Veth's mind as he fought. It was like a weight pressing down on his thoughts, trying to crush him into the ground. Every instinct in his body told him to run. Every part of his training said this was impossible. But he kept fighting because the humans kept fighting. And if they could stand, so could he. Taiho was at the front, his blade cutting through Vorn after Vorn. Blood covered his armor. Some of it was his own. He moved like a machine, never stopping, never slowing. When one enemy fell, he was already attacking the next. But Veth could see the truth. Taiho was shaking. His movements were slower than before. The fear was still there, still eating at him. He was not immune to it. He was simply refusing to obey it. "Captain!" Yuna shouted from somewhere in the chaos. "We cannot hold much longer. There are too many. We hold until the ships arrive." Taiho shouted back. "1 more hour. Just 1 more. 1 more hour." It sounded so simple. But Veth looked at the endless sea of Vorn and knew that 1 hour might as well be forever. A Vorn leaped at him from the side. He barely managed to block it with his weapon, and the creature's claws scraped across his scales. Pain exploded through his arm, but he did not stop. He could not stop. If he stopped, he died. Somewhere behind him, he heard Hana's voice calling out medical instructions. She was still trying to save the wounded, even in the middle of the battle. Even when she should have been saving herself. "Pressure on the wound. Keep pressure on it." "I am coming." Veth turned and saw her running across the battlefield toward a fallen Pirani soldier. Vorn were everywhere, but she moved between them like they were not even there. When one got in her way, she shot it without breaking stride. She reached the wounded soldier and dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands moved fast, pulling out bandages and medicine. The Pirani was barely conscious, his blood spilling onto the ground. "You will be fine," Hana told him. Her voice was calm and steady, like she was not surrounded by death. "I have you. You will be fine." A Vorn lunged at her from behind. Veth tried to shout a warning, but he was too far away. Jiho was not. The young soldier appeared out of nowhere, his blade flashing in the dim light. He cut the Vorn down before it could touch Hana, then turned to face 3 more that were coming. "Get him out of here!" Jiho shouted at Hana. "I will cover you." "Jiho, your leg." "I know." "Go." Veth saw it then. Jiho's left leg was badly wounded. Blood ran down it in streams, and he could barely stand. But he did not fall. He stood between Hana and the Vorn, his blade ready, waiting for them to come. Hana grabbed the wounded Pirani and started dragging him toward the medical room. She was crying, Veth realized. Tears ran down her face. But she did not stop moving. Jiho fought alone against the 3 Vorn. His movements were slower now, weaker. The first one fell to his blade. The second took longer. By the time the third reached him, he was on 1 knee. But then Yuna was there. She crashed into the Vorn like a missile, knocking it away from Jiho. Her blade found its heart before it could recover. "Get up, soldier," Yuna said, pulling Jiho to his feet. "We are not done yet. Your leg is still attached. That means you can still fight. Move." She half carried, half dragged him back toward the defensive line. Veth followed, covering them as best he could. The Vorn were everywhere now. The walls had fallen. The barriers were broken. There was nowhere left to hide. Only Doyun remained at the main gate. He had dragged his heavy gun to the center of the courtyard and was firing in all directions. The gun was smoking, overheating again, but he did not stop. He could not stop. If he stopped, the Vorn would flood through and kill everyone. "Come on!" Diane roared at the enemy. His voice was raw from screaming. "Come on! Is that all you have?" "I have not even started yet." A Vorn reached him. He smashed it aside with the barrel of his gun and kept firing. Another came. He kicked it away. Another. He pulled out his pistol and shot it in the face. But there were too many. Even Doyun could not hold forever. Taiho appeared beside him, adding his own fire to the defense. "Doyun, we need to fall back to the inner building. If I fall back, they break through. The medical room is right behind us. Then we move the wounded first. Yuna, start evacuation." The next minutes were chaos. Veth helped carry wounded soldiers into the inner building while the humans fought to hold the line. Hana was everywhere at once, treating injuries, shouting orders, keeping people alive through pure willpower. Jiho, barely able to walk, had climbed to a window and was shooting at Vorn that tried to enter through the roof. His aim was still perfect, even though his body was failing him. The psychic scream came again, stronger this time. Veth felt his legs give out, and he crashed to the ground. The fear was overwhelming. It filled every part of him, crushing his will to fight. He saw other coalition soldiers falling around. Him, Karani, Talmari, Veshan. They all collapsed, paralyzed by the terror that the Vorn had created. But the humans stood. Veth did not understand how. He could see the pain on their faces. He could see the tears in their eyes. They felt the fear just as strongly as everyone else. Maybe stronger. But they stood. Taiho reached down and grabbed Veth's arm. His hand was shaking so badly that he could barely hold on. But his voice was steady. "Get up," he said. "This is not over. Get up. I cannot. The fear is a lie." Taiho pulled him to his feet. "The Vorn want you to think you cannot fight. They want you to give up. But you can fight. You can stand. Fear does not control you unless you let it." Veth looked into Taiho's eyes and saw it then. The fear. It was there, deep and terrible. Taiho was terrified. He was more afraid than Veth had ever seen anyone be afraid. But he was still fighting. How? Veth whispered, "How do you do it?" Taiho smiled. It was a tired smile, a broken smile. But it was real. "I think about the people behind us. The families. The children. I think about what happens to them if we fail. And I decide that my fear is smaller than their lives. That is all. I choose what matters more." A massive explosion shook the building. Part of the roof collapsed. Vorn poured through the gap. Screaming with hunger, Doyun was waiting for them. He had moved his heavy gun to the center of the room, pointing up at the hole in the roof. When the Vorn came through, he opened fire with everything he had. Bodies fell like rain. The gun screamed louder than the Vorn ever could. Diane stood in the middle of it all, a giant among monsters, refusing to fall. But then his gun finally died. The heat had destroyed it. Diane threw it aside and pulled out his rifle. He kept shooting. A Vorn reached him. He fought it with his bare hands, snapping its neck with a strength that seemed impossible. Another came. And another. And another. Doyun fell. Yuna screamed his name and charged toward him, cutting down every Vorn in her path. But she was too late. By the time she reached him, he was on the ground, covered in wounds, his eyes looking at the ceiling. "Doyun, Stay with me. Yuna pulled him into her arms. Hannah, we need help here. Hannah ran over, her medical bag already open. But Veth could see from her face that there was nothing she could do. The wounds were too many, too deep. Doyan looked up at Yuna and smiled. Blood dripped from his mouth. Did we hold? We held. The ships are almost here. We did it. Good. His eyes started to close. That is good. Tell my family. Tell them. He never finished the sentence. Yuna held his body for a long moment. Tears ran down her face. Then she gently laid him down, picked up his rifle, and turned to face the remaining VOR, and her face was no longer sad. It was cold, empty, terrible. Come on, she said to the enemy. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Come and see what humans do when you take someone from us. The Vorn attacked. They should not have in the distance. Veth heard the sound of engines. The evacuation ships had arrived. The civilians were safe. They had held. They had actually held. But as he looked at Doyan's body, at the blood covering the humans, at the mountain of dead Vorn around them, Veth wondered what victory really meant, and whether any of them would ever be the same. The evacuation ship was quiet. 3 days had passed since the Battle of Kethra 7. 3 days since Veth had watched 5 humans hold back an army of 50,000. 3 days since he had learned that everything he knew about war was wrong. He walked through the ship's corridors slowly, his wounds still healing. The medical staff had done their best, but some injuries went deeper than flesh. Some injuries were in the soul. The human soldiers were in the medical bay. Veth had visited them every day, though he did not always know why. He would stand at the door and watch them, trying to understand what he had witnessed. Trying to understand who they were today. He finally found the courage to speak. Taiho was awake, sitting up in his bed. The captain looked older than before. The battle had taken years from him, carved lines into his face that would never disappear. His body was wrapped in bandages, and machines hummed softly beside him, monitoring his healing. You are the Karani, Taiho said when he saw Veth at the door. Veth, come in. Veth entered slowly. The room was small and clean, filled with the soft beeping of medical equipment. Yuna was in the bed next to Taiho, sleeping. Her face was peaceful, but even in sleep, her hands were closed in fists. Jiho was in a healing pod across the room. The young soldier's body floated in blue liquid, his wounds slowly closing. He would walk again, the doctor said. But it would take time. Hannah was not in bed. She was moving between the other patients, checking their status, adjusting their medicine. Even wounded herself, with her arm in a cast and bruises covering her body, she refused to stop working. She has not slept in 2 days, Taiho said, noticing where Veth was looking. We've tried to make her rest. She refuses. She says there are too many people who need help. She is remarkable, Veth said quietly. They all are. Taiho looked at his sleeping soldiers with something soft in his eyes. I have led many teams in my career, but this one, they are different. They are family. Veth stood in silence for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle. How did you do it? The Vorn's psychic scream. It is supposed to be impossible to resist. My people have no defense against it. None of the coalition species do. But you stood through it. You fought through it. How? Taiho was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his hands, at the scars and bandages that covered them. We did not resist it, he said finally. We felt it. Every single one of us. The fear was real. It was the most terrible thing I have ever experienced. I saw my death 1,000 times. I saw my soldiers die. I saw everyone I loved disappear into darkness. I felt it all. Then how did you stand? Taiho looked up at him. His eyes were tired but clear. Because fear is not the end. Fear is just information. It tells you what you care about. When the scream hit us, yes, I was afraid of dying. But I was more afraid of the people behind us dying. I was more afraid of failing my squad. I was more afraid of giving up than I was of death. He smiled just a little. So I chose. I chose which fear to listen to. And I stood. Veth shook his head slowly. My people teach that fear is a signal to retreat. Fear means danger. When you feel fear, you run. You survive. That is how we have lived for 10,000 years. And you have survived. That is not nothing. Taiho's voice was gentle. But survival is not the same as living. My species learned long ago that some things are worth dying for. Not because death is good. Not because we do not fear it. But because the alternative, living knowing you abandoned others, living with that shame, is worse than any death. I do not understand. You do not have to understand. Not yet. Taiho leaned back against his pillow. Fear is not our weakness. It is our compass. It points us toward what matters. A life without fear would be a life without meaning. We fear because we love. We fear because we hope. We fear because we have something to lose. He closed his eyes. The Vorm made a mistake. They thought our fear would break us. But fear is what made us fight harder. Fear for our soldiers. Fear for the civilians. Fear of failing the people who trusted us. That fear was stronger than any weapon they could create. Across the room, Hana paused in her work. She had been listening. She walked over and sat down on the edge of an empty bed, her tired eyes looking at Veth. In medical training, they teach us about fear, she said softly. When someone is badly wounded, when their body is dying, they become afraid. That fear is natural. It is the body trying to survive. But we also teach that fear can be redirected. You can be afraid of dying, or you can be afraid of leaving your family. You can be afraid of pain, or you can be afraid of not saying the thing that you wanted to say. She smiled sadly. We were all afraid when the Vorn attacked. But we chose what to be afraid of. We chose to fear failure more than death. And that choice gave us strength. Veth thought about her words. He thought about everything he had seen. Finally, he spoke. I want to understand. I want to learn what you know. My people have been surviving for 10,000 years, but I am not sure we have ever truly lived. We have always run from fear. We have never learned to carry it. Hannah reached out and touched his arm gently. It takes time, and it takes something to fight for. You have already started. You stayed with us. You fought beside us. That was the first step. I was still afraid. Of course you were. So were we. She stood and went back to her patients. Being brave is not about not being afraid. Being brave is about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Later that day, Veth visited the ship's morgue. Doyen's body was there, preserved for the journey home. He would be buried on Earth with his family, with honors that most soldiers never received. Veth stood alone in the cold room, looking at the man who had died holding back an army. I did not know you well, he said to the silence, but I will not forget you. Your people call what you did heroism. My people call it madness. Perhaps both are true. He placed his hand on the cold surface of the preservation unit. Thank you for teaching me, for showing me what courage really means. He stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything he had learned. When he finally left, he went to his quarters and began recording a report for the Karani High Command. The words came slowly at first, but then they flowed like water. He spoke about the battle, about the humans, about what he had seen and what he had learned. He ended the report with words that he knew would change nothing. The Karani High Command would read his report and dismiss it. They would say the humans were crazy, that their behavior was illogical, that survival was still the only thing that mattered. But Veth recorded it anyway, because some truths needed to be spoken, even if no one listened. "I have served in 47 campaigns across 12 systems," he said into the recorder. "I believed I understood war. I believed I understood fear. I was wrong. The humans taught me that fear is not a weakness to be avoided. It is a fire to be forged in. They did not fight because they were unafraid. They fought because they were terrified, and they refused to let terror win. They felt every moment of horror that Devorn created, and they stood anyway. 5 humans held back 50,000 enemies, not with superior weapons, not with special abilities. They held because they chose to, because the people behind them mattered more than their own lives, because fear told them what was worth fighting for, and they listened. If these fragile, short-lived creatures can stand against the darkness with such ferocity, then perhaps we have all underestimated what it means to be truly brave. I no longer pity humanity. I no longer see them as weak or foolish. I fear what their enemies must feel when they realize the truth. Humans do not break." He ended the recording and sat in silence. Outside his window, the stars stretched endlessly into the black. Somewhere out there, the Vorn were still expanding, still conquering, still spreading their terror across the galaxy dot. But now they had made an enemy they did not understand. An enemy that felt fear like everyone else, but chose to fight through it. An enemy that would rather die standing than live kneeling. Veth thought about Taiho, still recovering in the medical bay. About Yuna, who had killed 100 Vorn while crying for her fallen friend. About Jiho, who had fought with a ruined leg because someone had to. About Hannah, who had saved lives with one hand while holding a gun with the other. About Diane, who had laughed in the face of death and died protecting strangers. Humans. Strange. Stubborn, beautiful humans. Veth closed his eyes and made a decision. When this war was over, when the Vorn were defeated, he would return to his homeworld. He would tell his people what he had learned. He would teach them about courage and fear and what it meant to truly live. And maybe, just maybe, the Qurani would finally learn to stop running. Because if humans could stand against the darkness, so could anyone. All it took was the courage to choose. All it took was learning what fear really was.